Hello, everyone. Welcome to Dr. Deep State. The title of our show today is Suspicion, the Currency of Power. We have a special guest back with us from Tampa Bay, Florida, and his name is Grant, and he is going to discuss Suspicion, the Currency of Power with us. He's a member of Epiphany Church Shrine now in Tampa. And before we get into things, I just wanted to say hi to the crew out there. I miss you guys, but we do have Grant here, so he's going to represent for us all. And we're excited to talk about suspicion, the power, the currency of power. And I want to say this for a moment, because I think our week in the locals community really built up on this. We're living in very peculiar times. And I don't know about Trump's golden age, but we are having a golden age in our locals community. And I do want to talk about what we discussed this week in relation to world events and what Grant's going to discuss today. So here we go. We're going to take that ride real quick, y'all. Before I get going, Saints of the Apocalypse, everybody that has ordered it, thank you so much. And my pitch for the book, it's available in audio, digital, hardcover, and paperback. If you don't think that it's the book that addresses our time that we're living in, then please don't review it. But if you think that this is absolutely a unique book that speaks to what's going on in the world this week, what's going on with the unveiling of events around us, that it's necessary. The saints are talking to us. They want us to hold tight to everything true, to the fullness of reality. And it was so booming this week how the saints speak to the events going on all around us. And the reason I'm asking people early on, not just to rate the book, that's great, and I truly appreciate it, but that it's a paradigm shifting book about the events that we're living in, because otherwise the other influencers are going to ignore it. It's something that basically we have to push from the edges and say, you can't ignore this anymore. And I know that's a tall order and it does sound grandiose. We started the work week this week talking about political religion. This is manifesting faster than ever in the world before. I have this picture juxtaposed with the new speech czar of the world. And I'll speak about him briefly, but the events that are kind of paralleling one another right now talk about the rise of something called political religion. In fact, the book here that's bringing us away from God's utopian vision into man's utopian vision, the millennial dreams are being created. That's the instrument. It's political religion, and it's based on a concept called decisionalism. And I'll tap on that a little bit, but our community dealt with it, and the responses of our community were outstanding, and we went through those, and links are in the description. It's $5 a month. We don't know where this free speech or this hate speech or these Noahide laws are going to be taking us. And we're getting into ideas that I'll show you that are very challenging, that we maybe have to consider really challenging the narratives, thinking outside of what we've been accustomed to. We need to get used to the idea that the powers that be, the cabal, the owners and controllers of international finance that are flipping everything on its head and feeding us to us, we have to be more discerning about these doctrines, because this is the emergence of, in this logical order of this empire, Pax Judaica. And we have to see how, in theological, transcendent terms, how these events are playing out so that we can shield ourselves from this deception taking place around us. And that's what we do in our locals community. And so the new doctrine that's going on this week is really mind-blowing. And I will say before I get going, and I hate to sound, I don't mind, There are certain voices out there, it's virtually everybody. Nobody's touching this because you voted for him or you don't want to face up to the reality that's going on. This is the Antichrist system being framed around us. Does it sound wacky, Christian? There are Catholic influencers that not only just like the genocide, don't just look the other way, pretend it's going to go away. I'll name them: Matt Walsh, Michael Knowles, Nick Fuentes. If you ever thought they had some truth and pick and choose, in my opinion, those days are over. When these guys are cheerleading this, and I'll give you an example. I watched a few minutes of a guy, don't know his name. I think it's Jeff from Dollar Vigilante. And he's showing a picture of Nick Fuentes. Got the memo. I think this is down. I think we should go there and steal their oil. I think we should kill him. He's okay with the killing part. He's okay with the lying part. And this guy's a new ager. And he's going, why would I want to become Christian if that's what Christ the King means? Lie, steal. I don't know that much about the religion, but I think that's all. Aren't those all against the commandments? These are people speaking in the name of Christianity and Catholicism, and we have to be discerning about the landscape. This is what the saints of the apocalypse are speaking to. And that's why I really want to hit traditional Catholics to embrace the fullness of the faith. I believe that's what the saints are telling us right now. And I know I'm sounding a little bit dramatic because it's just crazy. Before our eyes, the unfolding, the pattern of empire, the overextension in the world, the massive debt, the debasement of our currency, the lack of unity, they're all signs of a decaying empire. And it's important to understand this because the passion of the church is happening very close to paralleling the events of the ancient world. So there's an attack before us of the rule-based system, and this is heavy. This is the stability and predictability of the international system is becoming unwound before our very eyes. And the possible impact on our own psyche and consciousness in relation to the God's order of being needs to be identified at this order, and there is ways to do that. So, for example, Carl Schmitt is going to say, we need to have a type of decisionalism. Forget the idea of systems based on belief, history, sacramentality, hierarchy, those revelations from above. In the crisis mode, in state of exception, the will to power will give you your marching orders. And so that's where we're at right now. And if you just ignore it, I think it's dangerous. I think it's very dangerous times we're living in. We have a speech czar that's coming to America from the pathological events going on over there. The guy speaks broken English. He belongs to not only is he head on the surveillance for that operation going on over there, but he wants to impose a world system of speech control, 5 years for talking about the kind of things, especially that we talk about in our locals community. But 5 years for just noticing things that, and Australia this week, this is getting very real. This is the empire of spectacle, and we're exploring the very foundations of the heresy that generate that so we can escape this deception in the empire of lies. And so the speech czar is talking to American media, and this is the classic this is the Schmittian state of exception that brought in Nazism. He's telling Americans on American television, what you've experienced in free speech cannot last. We can't have it. In order to preserve the First Amendment, we must abolish or ignore or degrade the First Amendment. This is exactly the factor that brought in Schmitt's order, and that is political religion. And we're experiencing a new iteration of that. And we see the events all around us. And if you think ignoring it's going to go away, it's not. You're going to get more of upside down world that the book of the apocalypse tells you about. People will trade a truth for a lie. A truth is Jesus Christ for a lie. Do you want to be part of that group? And look, this sounds wacky. I've never talked about this before, but on Memory Hole Friday today, we looked at Dave McGowan's book because we have to identify the big lie, the big wars, the events that happened over the last 5 years. that some people have never recovered from. Some people woke up and then they went and signed on to the dictator. They want more lies. They want more lies in the name of Catholicism, in the name of tradition. We have to kind of snap out of it. So we looked, when you identify the patterns, like, why do people fall for these enormous lies? Because they're scared to challenge these narratives of the world, of the cabal. And so we looked into that because it's important. And I never did it before, but in these times, we have to start really, if you've never gone here before and it's new to you, our community is a comforting place. The people that are there will walk you through it through the lens of the church, so that you do it in order to live outside of fear. You need to face the lie to get outside the fear. And you have a community of people that want to build each other up in their Catholic faith. Why? Because our goal is to become saints, and understanding this information is crucial right now. So if you're listening on a podcast and you're not looking at the visual, I have that event from World War II. And we are going to go over the 14 best revisionist books and find the common thread and connect it back to the other big lies, because it's time to actually deal with this. To be too cool for school with your audience, to not talk, oh, that's the crazy people. No, we're looking at empirical evidence of these events weighted against people that, just wage ad hominem attacks against anybody that challenges the narrative. The time to do this is now, to really look boldly at these big stories. In this case, it was leveraged to bring in the lie of Nostra Aetate and the blurring of the heavenly vision that we're living in. We're really living in the construction of this Pax Judaica. We're past the head, we're past the shoulders, we're past the kneecaps, we're in the 10 toes. It's being created around us. And that's exactly what the agenda is. So I'm not going to go through it right now, but we're seeing the unrolling of this agenda. And when you look at the top, it talks about the liquidation of a certain kind of people. And it sounds scary. Once you go through it with other people, it can actually embolden you to love truth, to love our Lord Jesus Christ, and to face other hard narratives. How do big lies get pulled up? And maybe you might have to press pause on this. The greatest writer of the 20th century said they turned this whole event upside down. The real event we don't get, we don't acknowledge. That's the control of this information. This is Kabbalah, to recreate reality. We have to get back to base reality understood through the Catholic Church. And again, this is a call that if you're interested, our community is $5 a month. Links are in the description. They're bringing in the Technate system. These are the tech bros. These are the 10 toes on the statue of Daniel. This is the merging of clay and iron for a brief period. They're realizing, they're manufacturing prophecy. Or as the Dark Enlightenment people say, the alien force from the future. We're beckoning it, we're summoning it, we're bringing it into reality. So this is the Greenland. This is all of these stuff. Why? Yes, there are geopolitical reasons, the oil, the Straits of Hormuz, on and on. But this biblically is what's rolling out before our very eyes, and the saints care. They want to help you. They have to speak about this, because this is the heirs of Russia. The two main ones, the political religion of the East and the West, are now forging together this new technate power, part of the 10 toes system, that's constructing the 10 toes. They claim to hate fascism. They claim to hate communism. But what they're doing is taking it and merging these heirs of Russia into a system that wants you to be on one side or the other of the spectrum. The target will be non-political people that don't want to be in their dialectical lies. You can see it right there. They're against non-political people, the people that just want to have the mind of Christ during these times, because they're going to ask you to get on one side of the fence or the other for their liquidation project. And it's coming real. So when we say things, and you thinking this is not insane, you wake up Monday morning and we knocked over this, look out Cuba, look out Denmark, look out Nicaragua, look out Costa Rica. And let me show you something, you all. If you do not, you have to understand we're living in sanity. As this is all going on, the big guy here, is asking to double the amount of the American defense budget. And we're supposed to believe everything up America first, really? And you're just going to be quiet and pretend like it's not happening. We can't do that individually. If you're not ready to speak out or tell your family or your neighbors, start looking biblically what is being rolled out and how does the mind of the church immune us from this virus that's going to affect basically the whole world. There's big lies, and sometimes they're not comfortable because all you have to do is, USA, and there's just some same old tricks in the book. But we can see these predictions are already for 2026. They're being manifest in the synodal church, in the world. The events are rolling out. And you have to, maybe if this is new to you, look at some crazy stuff like, really? They got in that thing in 1968 and got in that cardboard shack, and now it's at the Smithsonian, and start going through like, how can you pull this massive lie off? And they've been doing it for a while, and we're living through it right now. This dream fantasy is going to be part of the great deception. So if this is something maybe you feel uncomfortable, maybe you laughed at people 10 years ago that talked about this, maybe you laughed about people 5 years ago, maybe 1 year ago, maybe you think it's nuts and you're checking out right now. But I ask you to look at this empirically and compare it to the outbreak 5 years ago, to what's going on in the world right now, and just turning everything upside down, because they are connected with the events of World War II. And finally, on Monday, what we're going over is the source of this heresy that infects our minds and gets us away from the church and into the anti-church. So it sounds kind of provocative, the title. Why do Protestants think, or in parentheses, why or how do Protestants think and act? And we're going back, the origins of this, obviously William of Ockham, come from debates within Catholicism, but the infection goes out into the world. So next week, we're going in the most important, this is what's being played out in the world right now. This nominalism, this cutting off of the transcendent realm of the world of saints and making that a big joke. You pray to dead people? That's crazy. We need the saints right now. They want to help us. We need to open up to what they are telling us right now, and the unveiling is happening. You cannot plead ignorance on these events anymore. They're being uncovered. They're in your face. There's an externalization going on right now. And the idea that Christ commissioned, took the vocation of Abraham, spread it to his disciples to live in the life of God through baptism, through that grand vocation, and somehow that meant infused grace. No, we need to get back to an understanding of how we connect to God in our system, because it's been severed through nominalism, reductionism, the atomization of everything. And so when we see this, we get back, and I think the most important bridge, I will say, is the life of the saints. Because once you become a nominalist, you hate the icon. And the icon God gave us to bridge ourselves, our place here, to the heavenly kingdom and our final destination in the new heaven and the new earth. And when you get infected with these ideas, you take everything that's true and good and beautiful, reduce it all. You call this an icon, the bridge between you and God, and instead you displace that icon in political leaders and celebrities. You make an idol out of the Bible itself, when God wants you to use the church as the bridge, not your interpretation. That's the ultimate idolization, that you think that you can define right and wrong. That's why we have these Zio people that call themselves Christians in the world. And that's what we're living through right now today. And dang it, Grant, I only wanted to take up 10 minutes at the time. I feel like a real jerk here, but I'm going to totally shut up and let you have it. And I hope some of what we talked about did set up some of the ideas that you have.
No problem. Well, thank you for having me back on, Dr. Haugen. It's great to be here again, and don't apologize, because that was tremendous and absolutely does relate to some of the things that we're going to talk about. And the last time that I was on, I sort of introduced an idea that I have been thinking about for a long time that I call the divine archipelago. And it's it's my attempt to understand how human minds operate in the time that we're living through and the things that affect them to keep them from understanding or seeing clearly a lot of the things that you just described. And I think one of the points that you mentioned about people's willingness to go along with certain things arising from fear and an unwillingness to just look at empirical evidence, even if it relates to an opinion or a conspiracy theory or something that goes outside of what's normally accepted in social discourse, really relates to uh, the particular components of the divine archipelago that I am here to talk about this evening. And to briefly kind of reiterate what we spoke about last week, it was the first of the three components of the divine archipelago, which is the individual determination of truth. It's that everything is in the hands of each individual person to define what is. And the second of those two pillars is an epistemic civilizational agnosticism, which is kind of a contradiction to the first one, being that there is no greater, broader truth, transcendent truth that we as a civilization acknowledge. There's no telos or purpose to history. There's no acknowledgement of a transcendent being or a lack thereof, which of course does a lot of good for every untrue theory about metaphysical reality and does not acknowledge the true theory about metaphysical reality. So you can see that through university systems and laws not acknowledging a religion, even the wrong one, but saying we're going to take a stance on what religion is true and we think it's this one. I think that would even be better than articulating that we're not going to take a stance on it, because I think, like I mentioned last week, it's making a claim about metaphysical reality implicitly in the negative sense by assuming the authority not to have a position. And so that's generally what encompasses the dual interaction of individual truth determination and civilizational lack of acknowledgement of truth. And what that creates is we're basically living in a playground of what someone like Ivan Karamazov would say, which is that if nothing is true, then everything is permitted. And people understand that the rules are that they get to decide what's true and that there is no externally acknowledged truth.
Yeah.
And in the vacuum that's left, power and advantage are what people understand as the binding point of any sort of relationship. So everyone is really just kind of seeking an advantage, but everyone also knows that everyone else is seeking an advantage as well, because there's no external authority binding anyone to truth.
I want to break in right now. This is exactly what we're going over this week in the chapter called Puritan Sorcery. And let me just read this because it fits so much, because we're talking, these ideas began with Spinoza and Descartes and Luther and so forth. And they're cutting off. That's the idea that reality begins with me. There isn't this external reality that we hook ourselves into. Okay, I don't want a lot of big words here. Let me just read the introduction because it's so apt to what you just said. And I'm sorry, I'm cutting you off, but it's a quote by Archbishop Fulton Sheen from 1948. And he says, a religion that does not interfere with the secular order will soon discover that the secular order will not refrain from interfering with it. And that's where we're at right now. And that's the birth of this metaphysical error called indifferentism, or separation of church and state. And the key word is separate. And it's the whole understanding of reality that we can be autonomous and define reality. And it's the ultimate heresy of modernism. And identifying it, why do we talk about it and use these big words like ontology? Because identifying the heresy for us as Catholics, to see how Protestant our thoughts have become, how frankly Jewish our thoughts have become. And we went through what Jewish nominalism is. And anyway, so very apt what you're saying to what we're discussing, especially next week on our chapter. Go ahead. Sorry, Grant.
And that point's completely true, because transcendent authority gets in the way of people's ability to assert power. And so
exactly, the will to power wants to destroy the hierarchy, the sacramentality, and the historicity. So it wants to decouple it from base reality, which is, I know people hate this, and well, maybe not our audience, it's the Catholic Church, historically understood. That is base reality. But if you can't understand that, then you can't understand heresy. And if you can't understand heresy, you can't understand the origins of modern pathology. In other words, the psychopathology that rules and dictates the modern world that we're seeing around us, and that nobody can call it out. And I'll just say, like at the moon landing, I'd say, sorry, somebody, oh, the moon landing, you're going to go there? Well, you're being told to your face right now, because here's how big lies work. And, Hitler would attest to this, or Plato. The bigger the lie that you don't push back on, the more enchanted, the more mind demons you allow in you. And that's why they test the borders of this. So, we haven't been back there since 1972. All the photographs are gone. All the technology's gone. But yet Elon Musk is going to say, now we're going to colonize Mars. And, if you ever remember this from class, the moon and the earth are this far together, and the Mars is like to the wall over here.
Right.
And the size of the lie. I mean, how big does it? Are we going to colonize Pluto next? When were you going to say, well, that sounds kind of odd. Maybe I should, or am I going to look foolish if I say anything? Do you understand that that's power from below? The will of power from below is taking you from Christ, from revelations historically understood. That's what's being snatched from us. That's the simulacrum being created. I promise I'm going to shut up. I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. And that's actually the other side of the coin of the next thing that I was going to talk about, which is that people, because what we're talking about here is the suspicion that people have of power. But when someone is kind of entrenched in the system, they give all of themselves to whatever representative they've bound themselves to, because their ultimate fear is to be without power. So they have to find something on the national stage or the world stage that they believe represents them and their interests. Because if they don't have that, then they are powerless. And they're viewing
the idols that Catholicism gives us, the saints and those idols, have been shifted. They've been transposed, and we go along with it because we've been indoctrinated into this mindset.
Right. It's their influencers, the people that people follow in the fitness community and whatever other communities that people are interested in. They throw all their weight behind people and then go along with anything they say, even when it has nothing to do with anything that they would have believed coming from the mouth of some random person on the street. But the result of all of this is that people view authority with suspicion, because everyone is acting as though advantage is the only thing that anyone is trying to seek.
Yeah, I see where you're going.
We have this mirage about the idea that, oh, we all just love freedom, and we all want everyone to have their freedom. And at the same time, we all understand that people, taking American politics, assuming that it's real and the conflicts are real, for the sake of this argument, because people think that they do, and they behave like they are real to get the kind of attention that they have. People are terrified of the idea of any one side having power over them. Everyone is constantly on the edge of their seat, waiting to see who is going to win the next time, even with supposedly impartial judicial nominations for the Supreme Court, where these are people who are supposed to be impartially interpreting law based on what's true. And in the same breath, everyone knows, oh, so and so is nominated by a Republican or a Democrat, so they're obviously going to use their power to wield it against me. And that is the general idea that people have about power, which is suspicion. And so we're
It's
doing
a Hobbesian war of all against all.
yes, because everyone is afraid. It's just this. It's a downward spiral of thought that starts with a fear or a lack of trust in authority. And so people think that by getting rid of a transcendent authority or the state not having the capacity to acknowledge one, that means that there won't be an overarching power or authority that extends itself into the lives of its citizens, which isn't true. It's just that instead of there being a transcendent authority that is open and obvious for everyone to see and observe, it's just a competition among all of the people who are vying for the tools and levers of power, who then exercise it without the knowledge of the people who are subject to them, who are then trying to hide everything that they do behind the puppets of the politicians that they put up, who are basically salespeople designed to take the ideas of the people who fund them and pitch them in a way that is tasteful to the people who vote for them. And that's how you end up with contradictory positions on the respective mainstream platforms, where you have Republicans who supposedly care about traditional American values, but then fuel the economy with imported labor and all these other things that destroy their traditional values. And on the left,
Exactly.
go ahead.
No, exactly. I just like, it's so funny. I should, we just, because there's so many examples just this week, like, I guess it was Megyn Kelly and Ben Shapiro or whoever, right? And Maduro actually is Catholic, and he outlawed pornography and LGBT. And I don't give a shit.
Right.
He's a commie.
Right.
But he could flip the script whenever it's will to power. It's arbitrary, and there is no standard of truth other than making you fear his power that he has behind him, and his power that he lets you know is he'll destroy your livelihood if you question him.
Right. And it's using kind of an obvious element to all of this that people don't recognize either, which is that almost nobody has the expertise or the knowledge requisite to navigate any of these matters, and they're put in the hands of just any random person on the street. I remember several years ago, and this is a little bit of a tangent, but I was walking. I wasn't walking the dog. My friend was walking a dog, and neighbor comes out and said, "Hey, your dog is super nervous." And I won't go through the entire details of what he said, but he basically could tell that my friend was not training the dog because he was exhibiting signs of nervousness, and he could tell that this person was letting the dog do whatever it wanted and not putting the dog in its place. Wow. So the dog didn't know what its job was. So the dog thought that its job was everything, and that it had to do everything and be aware of everything because the dog wasn't being disciplined. And so giving that dog more freedom, giving that dog more free reign of the house to do what it wanted, was actually bad for the dog's health because it couldn't handle all of the responsibilities to which it was supposed to attend. And I'm not calling people, well, yes, I am. I am calling people dogs because we're limited just like dogs are. And we're not, people have no idea what's going on in the world. All the information that we receive is mediated. But as soon as people read a 5-minute article about any event that's happened in the world, they automatically assume that their opinion on it is basically expert testimony, and they never question their opinions, and then stack all of those incorrect, falsely informed opinions on top of one another, and then cast a vote.
And then I think on top of it, because people used to think any challenge of the narrative was conspiracy, but now they're realizing 40-50% of our pop music is phantom music created by AI. The deep fakes are all over. They're claiming these crowds, whether in Iran or Venezuela. Some of them are events from 2 years ago. Some of them are perhaps real, and many of them are AI generated. And so when people kind of now, they can't ignore it, because that narratives being pushed, and they throw up their hands and do what you do. It's like, okay, I'll just listen to the will of power because I'm overwhelmed.
Right.
And that's, how did this system, this Hobbesian system begin, this eminentized system of the Leviathan. And one of our contributors on Locals called the Leviathan the political restrainer. How did this come into being? It's because people long for stability and predictability in the international system, in our households. And when that's jiggled, there's a crisis, and then the agenda is forwarded because they can mold people to it. And what we're looking for right now is, we don't have all, go ahead, because it's so true. We don't have all the answers. So what do we do, Grant?
Right. Well, and also to respond to what you just said, it's people falling victim to the control that they attempt to exert over civilization. And so the control that people are trying to exercise, as you just described, is they want to have a predictable manner of governance that can't have the power to harm them in certain ways, but the mechanisms that we've put in place deliver the power to the worst of those people in ways that we just don't get to see. And so when you look at the idea of trusting in God and trusting in his plan for the authorities that a person will have in their own life, whatever they are, we're not promised that we're going to have good authorities. You don't get to choose into what household you are born. But
Right.
every example of behavior to someone who is clean of heart it points to what is right, because either you will see good treatment and good behavior and think that's what I want to emulate, that's what I want to be like,
Mhm.
or you will have a counterexample of behavior and treatment that makes you think, I never want anyone to experience what it is that I'm experiencing. And everyone has the choice to make based on a very clearly divided line that anyone can determine. And that same analysis can echo all the way through the different levels of authority to which people are subject at every level of civilization. And as I said before, our attempts to control or change that, they just mask who is delivering the poor treatment. They don't ever ensure that we're going to receive good treatment. And that's what this competition for power at the top of our civilization is. It's just, there's not going to be a transcendent source of authority.
Yeah.
And so the worst people in society, anybody who is watching this, you can think of a social climber or someone else that you have seen in your life who is just trying to reach the top. And
Mhm.
I don't know about anybody else, but when I think of participating in that kind of a fight, I don't want to be involved in anything like that. I don't want to participate in a subversive or underhanded dog eat dog vying for power in a cloak and dagger sort of way. And that's
Mhm.
actually a point that I want to get to a little bit later on about solutions to this.
Okay.
But an example that I wanted to bring out from this, because my interest is in the cross section of principles and their practical application in a broad sense, and then the way that those things all trickle down even to the human daily lives that we all live, because I am interested in finding out what's affecting how I think and what I do in ways that I don't realize, and also helping other people come to understand those things. And so something that the individualistic mind can't wrap its head around. Oh, one more point. This entire thing is something that libertarianism misses. Someone made a comment about libertarianism the last time I was on here. That's one huge thing that libertarians miss, which is that they think of the state as this impartial facilitator of transactions, and that since people don't want others to aggress them, they won't then aggress others. And they think that the non-aggression principle and outlawing violence will mean that people will not try to do violence to each other,
Mhm.
or won't try to get around the legal obstacles in their way. And that's basically the American legal system is basically filling in all the loopholes that people are trying to take advantage of because they go, oh, there's not a law for that, so I got to do it, and they retroactively go, oh no, you actually weren't allowed to do that. But anyway, distilling this down to the interpersonal level, you have, like, I don't know how familiar you or anyone else is with what's going on right now in dating, but young men and women are not dating. There are just the relationships between
Is
young
this
men.
like the incel stuff?
Yeah, I would say that's a part of it. But like the
Yeah.
manosphere, feminism, all of those things, all of the related communities, that is the result of people looking at every relationship as a transaction.
Transactional. That's the
Yeah.
word we hit today. That is imputed righteousness of Luther. Why Protestants think like the Judeos, and it becomes and it's the separation of grace and nature that
Right.
is happening. And in our Catholic lives, we live in a fallen state, but it's not totally deprived. Nature is not totally deprived. We still have some natural virtues, and we cooperate with God's grace. And it's important to reiterate this. This is our climb back to reality. That is our thread to reality. That paradigm, and that, like you're saying, the other one, the nominal reductionist one, is accelerating at a faster and faster pace.
Right. And that's the result that's occurred there is men and women trying to get as much as they can out of a relationship while putting in as little as they possibly can. And you can think of it and this is like an ages old way of thinking, but
Yeah.
women bragging about their ability to extract money and resources
Yeah.
from men, and men bragging about their ability to seduce women. And so that's substantively demonstrative of the concept that I'm describing, which is both parties viewing each other with suspicion and also supposedly wanting to overcome each other, but they defeat themselves because they use the other sex as their measure of value.
That's good, Grant. And these are all actually indicators. These are all things that are present in the decline of empire. So they're kind of similar characteristics. And I did watch a short yesterday. It was actually everything's AI now. Like, so it looked kind of funny, the title. I'm not interested in dating. I'm too old. But I don't know why I clicked on it. But there's some young girl and she's going, there was another one and she was like single mother and she's had all these demands. It's even AI is the voice of reason saying she puts all these demands, and on her, like you said, on her end, she wants to say the minimal that she'll put.
Right.
And it's just like, from my sense, I just looked at that and it's like, I could care less how good looking you are. I would stay away from you.
Yeah.
But like, if that's the culture, if that's the mindset that the kids are in right now, I know I sound like a grandfather, but the kids are in right now. Yeah. It's not an environment that people can flourish in. And it's kind of the result of a totalitarian regime, it's a high distrust society. And that was one of the things we came up this week when what kind of monsters being created. And one of our people on Locals grew up in a communist regime was just zero trust. And the software and the AI and the surveillance they're putting in is a zero trust system. So it's going to accelerate all these worst things that you're talking about. Sorry, Grant, go ahead.
That's all right. And that's an interesting point. And it makes me think of what, and I'm not advocating for Julius Evola, but I read a bunch of his stuff back when I was kind of originally learning about some of these things. And he describes kind of the mirror image of the totalitarian state and the organic state. And that the totalitarian state, in my words, not his words, paraphrasing him, it's like an ape of the organic state, where the organic state is more like a family, where people have an individual expression and they do their own things freely, but everyone kind of understands that there's this greater purpose that the entire family is moving toward. And there are certain things that you wouldn't do in your house or at all, not because your parents are getting in your face and going, no, don't do that. But because you know that it's not right. I mean, like I wouldn't go inject myself with heroin at dinner when I was 13 years old. I wouldn't do it now, but I wouldn't have done it when I was 13 either. And the entire conception of like American license freedom is, well, why shouldn't you're not hurting anybody, you know?
Yeah, that's what they don't get. They don't get the libertarian, so the transcendent realm of reality, which is God's order of being is hierarchical, that we are true, good, and beautiful because we participate in God's truth, his beauty, and his goodness. And the key word that brings all of these ideas, I believe, that you're talking about, God together, Grant, is what we talked about today. It's the word separation, whether we're talking about Descartes or Luther. For Luther, we couldn't just be connected and kind of refine ourselves and cooperate with God's grace. He couldn't deal with that. So he came up literally the word an alien force. And he has this transactional thing where he imputes. So we're excrement, but he imputes this in us, and we're snow. And this is the modern political mindset. That's the source of this air. And we have to identify it because it's being pushed again. It wants to sever us from the hierarchy, the tradition, and the sacramentality. And it's the language of the synodal church, the listening church. They don't want us to keep that thread, the together thread that's separated, right? That through history, through the sacraments, how we've been connected to God through the millennial church, our age. And everything now is power from below and the arbitrary listening. And it's just so utterly typical once you see it. And it's because it's important that we identify the source of these in the world to kind of help clear our thinking. And even when you come up with examples of young people dating, it's really important because I'm going to wait till you come at the end, but all you can do is identify this in all humility, repent, and try to follow the model set by the church and the traditional organic family model that's a type of the Holy Family to rebuild this order. I'm sorry, Grant, go ahead.
No, that's quite all right. And it's absolutely true. And there was something that you just said that I really wanted to respond to. Maybe I'll remember. Oh, it's separation, the idea of separation.
All brings us together.
It
atomization, separation, because they can rule us when we're all separated. It's easy to rule us and control us.
And the separation of all these different spheres disintegrates the mind and keeps it from being able to catch how different ideas tie into layers of reality to which they pertain, but aren't entirely obvious when they're just explicitly mentioned, or I'm sorry, out of context mentioned. And so I know that's kind of an abstract thing to say, but I'm gonna make it concrete.
Let me just say this really quick. I might be driving my crowd crazy by me interrupting. They say, "Will you stop interrupting your host?" But it's such a bit. Everything's compartmentalized in the modern world.
Yes.
The disciplines, the Renaissance thinking that could connect the dots, they needed to sever that. We have a department of sociology. We have a department of psychology. So we don't connect the dots, and that's why a space agency could pull this off because everybody's compartmentalized.
Yes.
And we have to start connecting the dots back to the holistic pattern of church ecclesiology. How does the church understand it, structure, and what it is, how it connects to God? Because if we get that right, we connect to the church, we connect with God. We're standing on firm ground, God's ground of being, his order of being, and we're less likely to be seduced in this age of deception by these big lies. Go ahead, Grant.
And that's the example that I was going to use was libertarianism, which is that if someone wanted to have a debate with me about libertarianism several years ago, I would have debated its terms. I would have debated whether it's better to have deregulation in the social order and in the economic order. But now I would ask a person who was a libertarian about the premises upon which they rely to even get to libertarianism in the first place, because it has the anthropology of man merely as a rational animal who makes decisions, in his self-interest. It has a theory of what the state is, that the state is an artificial institution that exists to facilitate transactions. And then another great example, I think it's I want to say it's Rousseau who says that like man is born free and everywhere he
For
is in
so.
chains. Like which that's just no. A man is born completely dependent on every person is born completely dependent on the people who care for it.
Well,
No,
even Marx's critique of liberal capitalism, why they start out with this, what we call methodological individual. It's severed from any history. It's completely reduced from any reality. It's severed from the transcendent and any realm. It's decoupled from anything. So
right.
man just comes into the world, and that's not reality. We come into the world connected to families that nurture us from the ground up, and it's a clock can be right twice a day. That's a good critique that Marx had of liberal capitalism, because absolutely methodological individualism brought us here right now with the Don Rowe doctrine, and everybody
Right.
just like, oh, well, the Democrats aren't calling it out, the Republicans aren't calling it out, so who am I supposed to talk to? Because we have no. Okay, go ahead.
No, that's right. And that's the another funny thing about that whole situation is that a libertarian will correctly observe kind of the foolishness of a communist college student saying that they're going to be like the 3D graphic designer of the party's like marketing bureau, and this like libertarian is living in a 300 square foot wage cage, making $3 an hour, working as the fixer of like the McDonald's AI cash register, but he thinks that he's going to be the corporate CEO in his Ancapistan republic or whatever. And the ability of the mind to just kind of rationalize its own positions, like that's when I think of the conversations that I had with libertarians about things that they would say. Why would your private army not just make a military dictatorship? Oh, well, the people would just spontaneously organize with their guns and fight back against them. It's like, really? I don't think that they would. But anyway, that's a super far tangent, but taking that relationship between men and women and connecting it to egalitarianism and the way that the idea of egalitarianism has put true order on its back foot is in how the church has treated of more like it's more in the decent sized components of the church, I guess I would say, which is the role of women in the church, in the kind of ubiquitous seeing like the woman who's running the church and is doing everything there, and a lot more general female involvement in the church than male involvement. And how I would say that that's arisen is that the church has people in the church have accepted, because not the church itself, but representatives in the church itself have accepted this idea that men and women are the same, and that power is the measure of human dignity. And then this narrative that men have historically oppressed women now means that we need to give women power in the church to rectify that historical oppression, because men and women are the same, and power is the unit of measurement by which that sameness is expressed. And so you have that exercised as the measure of value for men and women in the church, and it's based on representation. Why? Because people are suspicious of people who have authority over them. So,
This is a good time for me to interject, because
yeah, go ahead.
it's Revelation speaks to this. We can come up with all these theories, but we have to, first of all, the difference between Schmitt's idea of decisionalism from below, because it's just will to power, and Vogelin would say a legitimate system has to begin on belief. And what that means is revelation. And so when we think of a sermon, a homily from a few weeks ago, when St. Paul from Revelation tells us, women, subordinate yourself. And he's like, oh, women, I know what you're thinking. And, men have to love their wives like God would love the church, because it's typologically a reflection of the Holy Family. He's explaining cataphatically, this is how we understand reality and connect back to God and ultimate reality and the new heaven and the new earth. But when you think of that, what does submission say? What does it mean to be in fear of God? What do these things say? And we can decouple of them and stuff, but the most important thing, it's a revelation. that can't be broken. So when you want to have some novel form of it, and you're right, the church has imbibed, the society's imbibed this, and it comes back to how we redefine the hierarchy. But when push comes to shove, and a priest has to properly understand what was the revelation of St. Paul, like how do these parts fit together to comport with God's order of being? And it's a really tall, but it's the opposite of a transactional relationship. And that's the funny part.
Right.
Go ahead.
Well, that's the only way that you can have a true relationship. I mean, and in any relationship where the other side knows that you're holding something back,
Yeah.
it takes away from the fullness of what it would otherwise be. And so anytime that you hear it's the constant refrain of anyone talking about any kind of meaningful authority, when someone says, you talk about the idea of having a king or an authoritarian ruler or something like that, they'll go, well, what if the king makes you wear your shirt backwards and you wear your pants on your head? Like they just come up with these absurd, like I guess that's not the worst possible thing that they could do, but they immediately go to how someone would abuse the power and never
Right.
use the power well. And it's the same thing with people talking about in any conversation about men and women and authority in the church. They'll say, well, what if your husband is like a drunk wife beater? It's like, well,
right.
Why is that the example? Again,
no, we can all say people that went deep into the true Catholic social order, you have to rethink your conditioning as an American, especially of what a king is. And
Right.
it comes from scripture, as in heaven, there's a heavenly kingdom, and we should replicate that. And Christian empire attempted to do that. And God gives authority, legitimate, real, like in the economy of signs and symbols, that what it points to is real, like our sacraments, that God really does give an authority to if it's in a properly, it's a proper Catholic social order. And people can argue other ones as well, but this is what you're kind of getting to. But our minds can't grab that there could be an order, an organic order, where the king is like the head of the family, hierarchical, and loves his people. That's just not operating out of self-interest. We can't imagine that. And we call that the Dark Ages. And we call the Enlightenment that these easily manipulated people, we call that enlightenment. And that's the system that Satan needs to bring the mark of the beast in, because he needs a mechanism by which you can freely decide. And that most perfect mechanism is this structure that we are living under. That's why anyway, I want you to go ahead. I mean, it's going to be transposed into an AI government infrastructure. So that's a whole nother kind of thing, but go ahead.
Well, it's exactly in that vein. It's people unwittingly turning themselves over to people who are exercising the same level of power. They don't have the legitimate authority, but they're exercising that power at the same level, just without people realizing it. When Pope Francis, for example, was doing things or saying things in relation to the Latin Mass and stuff like that, or maybe that's not, I don't know if that's anyway, whatever example that anyone wants to plug in, people were excited about his authoritarian unilateral use of power to give a more democratized view of the church. They're excited about the exercise of power that supposedly empowers them.
Paradox.
And at the same time, yes, exactly. And at the same time, not acknowledging or giving credit to the voices that had issue with what was going on in certain ways. And so that's an example of a time where people don't recognize that they're throwing their weight behind an exercise of power that they, in theory, would disagree with. And so, kind of taking this toward the conclusory ideas and solutions, I think that the wrong solution to this is what I would describe as the Ned Stark example. And I'm not advocating for anybody watching Game of Thrones. I watched it before I cared about morality and common decency. I'm not telling you what to do, but I wouldn't watch that show now. But anyway, everybody knows who Ned Stark is, I assume, where he ends up. It's been out for a long time, so spoiler alert, gets his head chopped off because he tries to play this political game inside the system as an honorable man who's not willing to go outside of what he believes is right or wrong when it comes to the navigation of power. Obviously, he actually does portray his ideals in a certain way, but that's ex post facto. It's not in the negotiation for power itself. And so he is dealing with truth and honor in a way that the people around him are not. And that doesn't mean that a person can't deal in truth and honor. It just means that you have to keep what is not true and honorable outside of you. And so this takes us to really what the solution is in relation to what God says. I think it's in the first chapter of First Corinthians, where St. Paul says that the weakness of God is stronger than the strength of men, and the foolishness of God is wiser than the wisdom of men. And so when you think about how the church grew, you have this objectively not a very good story where this random carpenter says that he's God, picks a bunch of other tradesmen to follow him around as his disciples. His own people hate him and think that he's blaspheming, and they basically get the government of Rome to execute him as this sort of pesky nuisance that they're getting rid of to try to keep a rebellion from happening in their land. That's not a heroic story on its face. It's not a heroic story, but God is saying, I'm so much more capable than you, that I can take these regular people in this not good story, and I'm going to grow my religion, my true religion, by having all these people go out, not seeking anything for their own gain, and just saying, hey, you need to believe this, and oh, by the way, you're probably going to get thrown to the lions tomorrow. And that's what they did. And so it took 300 years or however long for that method to deliver Christianity to the highest realms of power and to begin to establish Christendom from that method. And then at the heights of Christian civilization, 1600s, you have, I guess, maybe slightly on the decline by that point, but generally speaking, everything is established. And then Western government goes, you know what? We actually don't need God in our state. We can figure this out for ourselves. We're doing pretty good. And then God said, okay, well, then I'm going to give you exactly what you're asking for. And then 250 years later, we can't say what a man and a woman is. And we are demonstrating how incapable we are without God, on the flip side of how capable he is of demonstrating his own ability through the least possible means. And so that, again, that message for us really is having a willingness to be the first in line. It's having a willingness to put yourself into a situation where you're not guaranteed the outcome that you want, because you are meant to play a role in one way or another. Now, there's a lot of people connecting this back to the talk about like men and women and relationships and should you get married and should you get married, all that kind of stuff. And people say, men shouldn't get married because the risk is so high. And the reality is that I'm not telling someone to get married or become a priest or do anything like that, but you're ultimately not getting married for the benefits of the positive feelings associated with having a husband or a wife. You're getting married because that could be the state that you're called to. And if it is, then you roll the dice. And if you have a fantastic marriage and relationship that goes for your entire life, and both parties are faithful all the way through, and all of their roles associated with marriage, fantastic. And if your spouse turns out to be like a horrible person and they throw themselves away despite your willingness to sacrifice yourself for them day in and day out, good for you, because that's what you were supposed to do. And that's just kind of, someone has to go first.
Yeah, and God will recognize your suffering.
Yes,
and that's like so many of these great stories of saints, especially women, were the ones that just endured. And as you're putting this together, I'm looking at the title, Suspicion, the Currency of Power. It seems to me the flip side of that word that you're talking about would be faith. How would you pull all this together, thinking about that being the antidote to all of this?
It's having the willingness to actually see reality that passes beyond death, because a lot of pagans will, I can't really even fault anyone for criticizing Christianity with whatever criticism they have, because people's perceptions of Christianity just come from whatever experience it is they've had with a Christian. They could say literally anything. This all pertains to the individual determination of truth. But one criticism that people like the neo-pagans have is they say that Christianity is weak. And they think that it's weak because it's not all about fighting a temporal battle for temporal power. And in reality, if we reduce ourselves to viewing things in that context, then Christianity does look kind of weak, but we also make ourselves look weaker by participating in that sort of an exchange. So if like a 5-year-old called me a poopy head and I respond to that and go, no, I'm not. No, you're a poopy head. It looks pretty bad compared to not responding to it at all, because I'm looking beyond what that 5-year-old can understand, and the points that he thinks he's earning, he's not actually earning. And so all that is to say that if you're thinking about your life really as a warfare, and the sort of, I would say, pretty hardcore view of every like religious potentially as a spiritual kamikaze pilot, where you're serving the interests of your flock. But if you're ever called to martyrdom, then your job is to die in the hopes that your death will do splash damage that fans out on all of the people who've executed you and make them go, wow, can't believe that priest or nun or monk just died for that without any problem. But you can only think in those terms if you're thinking of your life as fighting in a real battle, that the outcome of which matters, and that it doesn't end when you die.
I think still, even in our debased world, when somebody does something like that would approximate the calculations of a martyr, that an almost pointless sacrifice, I think there's still a level that people respond to that. It gets people thinking outside of the spectacle. And that's why I think it's a necessary point of departure. What you're saying, like about the Nietzschean idea, his critique that humans are weak, we're all herd animals. But when you think about his Masonic kind of take on the weakness of Christianity, it's really putting a proper Christian life upside down, some of the assumptions. But at any point, it's waiting for the Uberman. That's the only choice. So it's really just putting us, it's accepting a kind of weakness because there will be an Uberman. So it just prepares us for a messianic kind of thinking, instead of this idea what Christianity is, that we take our fallen nature and through the cooperation of God, through our quest to be saints in every way, for the purposes of serving God, we make ourselves better in submission to God's will for our life. That's heroic if you put it in that context. But once you remove it from that context and how Christians operate on the terms of the world, it does not look heroic anymore. It looks like one compromise after another.
It only just depends on whether or not Christianity is true. And that's, I think, another fall that people fall into, which is that there's kind of this constant, this transient nature about conversations about reality, where people will accept and abide by certain premises for a few seconds and then switch to different ones the next few seconds, and different conversations change in and out of what's acknowledged and what's not. Again, attributable to this whole problem of people getting to define whatever truth they want. But I was actually, I'm reading The Three Ages of the Interior Life by Father Garrigou-Lagrange. I've only just started, but the beginning of it is phenomenal. Go figure. But he makes the point that if what we believe is really true, then the lives of the saints are not actually, this is paraphrasing because I don't know if he says that they're not actually extraordinary, but he says that if what we believe is true, then the lives of the saints are really ordinary lives. That's really the ordinary life of someone who is corresponding to reality, instead of like for someone like Nietzsche, where they're basically his entire philosophy is the macrocosm of I'm really enjoying this cheeseburger right now. And Christianity's bad because it says that I shouldn't be having fun enjoying this cheeseburger. And there's not anything on the other side of it. And I should be able to decide that that's what's good. And he still ends up quantifying things in terms of it's naturalism in part, and he's quantifying things in terms of what humans are capable of doing, and he's maxing out the scale of quality in a human way. And anybody who is defining their lives in terms of the will to power, they are subjecting themselves to a merely human idea. They're subjecting themselves to a man.
Yeah. The transcendent realm has collapsed into the earthly, the immanent realm, and that's the crisis of modernity. And let me reflect as we close here again on the words of Archbishop Fulton Sheen from 1948. A religion that doesn't interfere with the secular order will soon discover that the secular order will not refrain from interfering with us. There's not much we can do like tomorrow about changing our government, or the idea that ideally we would wish that Christ was king over our earthly authorities and so forth. But we can adjust that to our own mind, that we have to get back, to get out of the world, to get out of the spectacle. You have to come back, and you're saying that you have faith, you trust that there is reality, and the transcendent, what has been revealed, must guide your life over all of the memetics and the change and the chaos and the psyops happening from below. So we have to keep our eyes on the prize and really be discerning about properly arrange our suspicions. So our suspicions shouldn't be about that's what's sacramental, the historicity of the revelations of the church and the God's order of being. We need to be solid and walk in faith of those revelations. And it's a crux, because I believe right now that we're supposed to hate our leaders right now. They want us to have a low trust. That's the externalization, because the solution will be AI governance. But I'll leave the very last words for you, Grant, and then we'll wrap her up.
I was going to say, I think that's the point is well made. And when you were talking or thinking about the reciprocal of suspicion in power, and that what we're really called to is faith in transcendent authority, and that
Absolutely.
the reactive attitude it's ultimately acting in reference to the evil rather than having a restorative attitude of initiating something that's generative. And when you think about that in terms of something like fighting or martial arts, someone who's fighting, you can't think about what the other person is trying to do to you. You have to think about what you're trying to do, and you're making your own attack and forming your own game plan. And obviously there are things that change that you have to adapt to, but you're adapting in terms of the necessary attention that you have to pay to what they're doing while you are acting, and your actions being ultimately the point of reference and what those actions are referring to as something constructive that you're trying to build, rather than just how to respond to what the other side is trying to do to you.
Yeah, we have to have a North Star, and we have to have a commitment. Christ came, he told Pilate, I came to attest for the truth. Pilate, through what is truth? And we understand as Christians and Catholics that Christ is he embodies truth. Truth is a person. And so we orientate everything in the passion of the church and the confusion of the events of the world. That is our North Star. And our telos and our purpose is to incorporate ourselves into the mystical body of Christ, obey the teachings of Christ, and refine ourselves in preparation for the marriage between Christ and the church. So thank you very much. I am going to invite Grant back again in February. So he's going to take us from the archipelago to the currency of power today. And he is going to take us, pull all these things back together again for us in February. I very much liked having you on again, Grant. Always a pleasure. And I look forward to seeing where you're going to take your ideas in February.
Thank you. And thanks again for having me on. It's always great to be here talking with you.
Absolutely. And thank you, everybody. Again, links for the locals community will be in the description section, and Saints of the Apocalypse, Escaping the Empire of Spectacle. I will put those links down there as well. I hope you all are doing well, and thank you very much.